Thank you for joining us at our pop-up today. We have our presenters here who are going to be talking about what we're missing, understanding the hidden risk of language deprivation and sign language deprivation. Am I getting that correctly? For children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And a little housekeeping today before we begin. We just wanted to remind everyone that the presentation portion of today's meeting will be recorded and shared on our Wisconsin Resource YouTube channel within a day or two, probably yet today. If you receive this link from a colleague or you stumbled onto it on our website, we would love to get your name on our mailing list so you can get all the information right away. Please share your information in our sign-in sheet and we'll be sure to get you on the appropriate list. To cut down on any background noise, please keep your mic muted during the presentation. But we would love for you to unmute and share your questions when we get to the Q&A part of today's session, which will not be recorded. If you could hold any discussion questions that you have for the speakers until that portion of our day, we'll be able to answer those and talk through those at the end. But if you do need clarification, if there's something that's happening during today's session that you need to make us aware of, just go ahead and put those in the chat. A certificate of attendance is available. Please follow the link that's in the sign-in form to get your certificate if that's something that you're interested in. And then lastly, we'll say, while Wisconsin Resource welcomes our guest speakers wholeheartedly, we do not necessarily agree or disagree with the information they shared, and we have not vetted their sources or data. They are presenting their information today. So without further ado, and so we can get to the good stuff, we are welcoming our speakers today from Wisconsin Sound Beginnings Cares. They'll talk a little bit more about their program, but we have Chris Kometer today, who's the early intervention coordinator, Lauren Burke, who is the communication specialist in listening, speech, and language, and then Chrissy Vorreyer-Davis, who is ASL Communications Specialist and the great Deaf and Hard of Hearing Ambassador Program Coordinator. So welcome to our speakers. We appreciate you being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you for inviting us to join to do this little pop-up session. We appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to everybody who's joining. We appreciate your interest. Here we go. Becky has introduced us already. All three of us will be presenting. I'm just going to get us started. So the purpose of this presentation is to talk about language deprivation for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. What is it? What are the risks for deaf and hard of hearing children? We often abbreviate it as DHH, children. How does it happen? And if we have time, a little bit about how early intervention can help minimize the risk of language deprivation. So first, we want to use a little simulation and an analogy to sort of help establish the concept. Let's watch this little simulation.
So when I was really young, probably kindergarten or first grade, I have a much older brother, and we'd go out to recess, and there was this older guy, he might have been in like 5th or 6th grade, that always used to pick on us, and I didn't really know what to do about it, and I definitely looked up and completely trusted what my brother
Today we went to a high school and I pet and held many different animals.
So hopefully that gave you just a little idea of the range of hearing differences, from having some hearing difference all the way to no hearing for spoken language. Also, just a very quick demonstration of how a person can have some hearing, yet not be able to hear everything, so not get the full message. We now have a little analogy. I'm guessing most of you have watched Wheel of Fortune. or played hangman. So let's do a little bit of that right now. I'm going to give you some letters of the message, but not all of them. And let's see if you can figure out the message. I've given you the vowels. Is it easy to figure out the sentence? I'm guessing no. Vowels carry the energy of our spoken language. They're louder. Most of them are lower frequency or lower pitch, and they're easiest to hear. But it is more difficult to understand the whole message with just the vowels. Now I'm going to give you the same sentence with only the consonants. I'm guessing you were able to figure out that sentence very quickly. My brother drives a truck. Why were you able to figure that out? Consonants carry the meaning in our English language. However, most of the consonants are more difficult to hear. The other reason you were able to understand that sentence without all of the letters is that you already have the English language in your brain. Your brain can fill in the blanks because you're familiar with these words and the way the words go together into a sentence that makes sense. Our babies and toddlers do not already have the language established in their brains. So even if they get part of the message like this, but not all of it, they are not able to fill in the blanks. They need access to the entire message in order to start learning language. Let's do another one. This time I'll give you the consonants again, but this sentence will be in French. Some of you may understand French, so this analogy might not work for you, but we're going to try it anyway because I think you'll get the idea. You able to understand this sentence in French? If not, why not? Most likely because you do not have the experience with the French language. It's not already established in your brain. So let me give you the sentence. Now do you understand it? No, again, because you haven't had enough exposure to the language. Here's the sentence in English. So just we hope this gives you a little introduction to, one, the need to have an established complete language, and two, the risk factor of being able to hear some, but not all, clearly. I'm going to turn it over to Lauren now.
Thank you, Chris. This is Lauren. We are going to spend a few slides talking about brain development. Why? Language does not happen at the ears. Language does not happen at the eyes. Language happens in the brain. A critical window of language acquisition is a short but powerful time frame when the brain is especially open to learning language. During this time, the brain rapidly is building neural connections. Critical periods or critical windows are not just growth spurts or phases when learning happens faster than other times. These are called critical windows because the brain actually it's expecting certain types of input. Next slide. Let's look at the way that neural synapses or those connections in the brain are formed over time. On this graph, we see 3 different brain functions and the timelines in which they develop or when they peak. In yellow, we see sensory pathways of vision and hearing. These, as you can see, begin in utero, so before baby is even born, and they peak at around 3 to 4 months of age, really young, when babies learn to focus their eyes, to perceive depth, to start noticing environmental sounds and distinguishing speech sounds. New synapses at this phase are firing and bursting rapidly. In blue, we see the rate of new neural connections that are focused on language pathways. Synapses here again begin forming in utero, and they rise to a peak at around 7 to 9 months of age. So let's picture that. That's when babies are really starting to babble, maybe starting to imitate, and they're starting to understand the early structures of the home language around them. In red, we see a more gradual pathway. These are more higher cognitive functions. These more complex skills don't hit their peak window until age 1 through age 3, after the initial two peaks have already occurred. I want to be clear that learning doesn't stop outside of these critical windows, but the connections are no longer created at the same rapid pace. So think of these peaks as like a blooming phase in the brain when the brain is overproducing synapses left and right. Later, Chrissy is going to share a little bit more about the pruning process that happens. But what does this tell us? The first year of life is highly, highly sensitive. Stimulation during this window, or the lack of input, which is what we're going to talk about in today's presentation, has a critical impact on later development.
Okay. Can you guys see this picture here? At the top, it shows on the left hemisphere of the brain. The bottom shows the right hemisphere. A child with both, they require work completely both together, and it's very busy. As we get older, one side focuses on the left side for language and sound. And that's why it's very important. When we discuss in regards to DHH children, the children's brain development with networking and connection through the years, it is so flexible. But the flexibility does not mean that the language access is optional. The brain development requires consistency, meaning full cooperation. Once the language is deprived, and it becomes very important. If the child itself does not have continual access to full access to their natural language during that important time, we don't just talk about the child and how they're behind in vocabulary or communication. We really talk about the development of the brain that is not receiving the language experience that's actually necessary to set up a strong language network. After that starts building and building and building, then that foundation is set. Our brain then will add the pruning process. After the first few years of life, the brain goes through so many uses or losses of the process and pathways. So understanding the brain and the uses and beginning to be stronger, but then the other side is starting to be cut off.
This is Chris. Sorry.
And what we want to discuss, we are not waiting for the child to develop language before we could provide accessibility to the language. The language access is what helps develop the brain, building the language. The goal is not just to teach the deaf child communication, but the goal is to make sure that the child has early, consistent accessibility to its natural language during that time, and very important time while the brain is most ready to develop. And that is why the first 3 years is such a critical time. Next slide, please.
This is Chris. I just want to clarify something that Chrissy was saying. Kind of got a little confused with the interpreting, is that when the parts of the brain that are used over and over, and there's lots of repetition, is is protected and kept, but the parts that are not stimulated or used over and over again are pruned. They're kind of reassigned. That was what she was intending. Go ahead, Chrissy. Sorry.
Okay. Now understanding developing the brain connected to the L1, that's the child's first language. The first 3 years of life is very important for the language development. And for those who are DHH, our priority should be to make sure that they have early, continuous accessibility to the full natural language with the emphasis on full. And we are not talking about giving the child a few signs, a few gestures, words, and communication strategies. That's not what it is. We're discussing about the access to language that actually allows the child themselves to understand, express their ideas, ask questions, socialize with other people, building relationships, and learning. For a deaf child, they may use ASL or another natural sign. But the priority is language access, not just access to speech. But this does not happen. It doesn't just accidentally happen. It takes effort, it takes purpose, planning, families, and professionals to work together. That actually requires us to actually watch the child's language and their development over time. So that way we can actually identify if this child, where their process is and what that may look like. And then providing access once is not enough. Our role is not to just sit back and wait and see if the language development in our role is to make the conditions to where the language can be developed. For children who themselves are deaf and hard of hearing, the goal from birth to 3 is it's a very important time to give children language, to give them access to language every day, and then monitor their development to make sure that the language is actually acquired. Next slide, please. Okay, now taking a look at the picture on the slide, think about the language in 3 steps. Exposure, access, and comprehension. If you can envision language and what that looks like, it's like a broadcast, a radio broadcast, or like satellite streaming. Language exposure, what that means is the language it's present, it's all around us. And the child may be surrounded by people who sign. They may be around people who are talking by communicating. But around that child with language, it does not mean or guarantee that child receives actual language. The next step is language access. Access, what does that mean? That means the child can perceive and understand that language in a way that is fully available to them. For the deaf child, we must ask and consider, can this child consistently be accessible to the language to use what's around them? Or do they have clear audio access to spoken language? Or do they have clear continuous visual captioning access to them or language access to them? And then we have comprehension. And this is where we have to ask, does that child understand what they're receiving? Are they beginning to understand the words, concepts, and questions, relationships, and those meanings? Sometimes we look at the child and go, okay, well, they're exposed with language. Their parents talk to them all day. They may be around signs all day. However, early intervention people like us, we are there to analyze, is this language actually accessible? Is the child development really understanding and comprehending? Uh, for the deaf and hard of hearing child, this is very important because just assuming that the exposure is having equivalent access is can overlook to those children's experiences severe deprivation in these languages so that we make sure that they are actually receiving what is being sent. That child must have the ability to receive and understand and use it. Next slide. When we use the term language deprivation, I sign it like this, like language is gone. We are talking about lack of consistent access to full, accessible, national, natural, language. If the child is already exposed to the language, you could take a look at some of those children. It can happen. First is spoken language without enough hearing access. The child may have a hearing aid or a CI, but to have technology does not mean automatically, hey, I can hear, I can understand. That is not the same way as hearing children. Technology can provide access to sound, yes, but the child still must recognize and understand the process and actually understand what they are hearing. And that takes a lot of time, intentions, teaching, practicing, and language rich environments with the family and professionals, which we may need to set up strategies in regards to this opportunity for that child to be able to acquire and express their language. So we should never assume, oh, okay, well, they have a CI, they can hear everything. We must ask what the child's access is to understanding and using. And then the second part is limited visual access. For a deaf child who is really is dependent on visual access and having continuous access to a person who can communicate with them, if they cannot see clearly the signs or expressions or gestures or any other visual information, if the access changes quite often, the important pieces are missing. It could be missing for that child. And the third is inconsistent communication. Imagine learning a language to where the language communication, like you sit down with your partner, or let's say methods, change constantly over and over and over again. I mean, it could be spoken, it could be sign, it could be gesturing, but the child may receive communication, but it's not consistent that's needed for the language. And that language is not there if it's continually changing. And finally, we must challenge that assumption and the exposure and equity and comprehension. The child can sit in a room all day and have spoken language, but still does not understand what anybody is saying. The language is present. That does not mean the language is accessible. It's not an accessible language. That does not mean that the child actually understands that language. So when we look at language deprivation, we need to move beyond asking questions. Is language around the child? We actually need to ask, can the child access language? Can the child understand language? Can the child develop abilities to express language? And that's where there's a difference between just given the exposure and creating language access.
This is Lauren. Chrissy, I really like those examples of where those missing opportunities for access can happen in everyday experiences for little ones. Let's put some of these new concepts into a visual to help us understand the hierarchy and then those long-term impacts on learning and development. So when children have full access to language, they can build all of these other skills they need in order to succeed. When children have just a little bit of access, inconsistent access, or no access to language, that foundation is at risk, and we will see impact on all future learning. So is the 0 to 3 window important for our DHH learners? Absolutely. It's important now as they are babies and toddlers, but it's also really important for future as well. Next slide. I see we're getting close on time, so I'm going to go through the next few a bit quick. This is a visual just to show, right? At the center of this image is language. When we have language, it impacts all other elements of our world. So we use language for all of these other aspects. It's embedded into everyday parts. With the foundation of language, all of these other aspects are possible. Next slide. Same visual, but if language is missing, let's think about all the other impacts that will also suffer. And I also want you to note a couple important circles here. So mental health is noted. Health literacy is noted. Relationships, quality of life. Language deprivation is impacting little ones not just in their young years, but into adulthood, and it can have consequences on their physical health and mental health in the future. Next slide. Here's a reminder, though, for everyone. Deafness does not all by itself cause language delays. Language deprivation is what causes language delays, and that's why we're here today, to better understand what is language deprivation and how does this happen for our littlest learners.
This is Chris. So I'm going to guess that so far in this presentation, you've been imagining this language deprivation risk is for children who have severe to profound hearing differences, and that would be an accurate picture of risk for these children. However, for children who have mild or moderate or even unilateral hearing differences, the risk is real for them too. Here's another analogy. A seed won't grow unless it has the input of sufficient water and sunlight. We may not know it's not growing for a long time. We keep waiting and waiting for it to start growing, and we may not notice that it hasn't gotten enough water or sunlight until it doesn't start growing when the other flowers start growing. It's missed all of that time period. So children who are hard of hearing or have that mild, moderate, or unilateral hearing losses, hearing differences, they can hear some speech, but likely not all of the speech sounds, as we showed with that Wheel of Fortune analogy. So people who are unfamiliar with hearing differences in children are often tricked into thinking the child can hear well when they turn to a person speaking to them, or parents may want to wait and see how their child does before agreeing to early intervention. Here's the problem with that. In the meantime, they're missing input. You can't see what they're missing and don't know that they're missing some of the spoken language until we notice that they're not producing some of the sounds or not producing the words or not putting words together. And by that time, they've missed 18 months or 2 or 3 years of input. So that puts them behind. Just a little bit of just some statistics about children who have mild hearing differences or unilateral hearing differences. studies showing that without support, these are the risks. This is what they find when children don't have the kind of support, either technology, audit listening technology, or intervention therapy services. By age 5, mild hearing levels have an impact on language in a significant way. A significant percentage of children have language underperformance, and that's relative to their overall cognitive potential. And retention rates, you see there, retention rates for children with mild hearing differences, that the rate for children with no hearing difference is 3%. And there's similar statistics for children with unilateral hearing differences. Just a couple of points from the literature related to early intervention for children who have mild or unilateral hearing differences. Studies compared language, there are studies that compared language outcomes of children with mild and unilateral hearing differences with that of children with severe to profound hearing differences, and generally their language levels were not any better. Some were even more delayed. And looking at the contributing factors, the children with mild or unilateral hearing differences had less frequent early intervention sessions, or more frequently canceled sessions. It appears that they were not viewed as having the same developmental urgency. Another factor that was shown through the literature is that when children are in services by 6 months of age, they more often are able to keep up with instead of having to catch up to age-expected speech and language. And another significant factor was that in several studies was that the mother's confidence in her ability to support her child's development was fostered more positive developmental outcomes. And then, of course, the consistent use of their hearing technology showed higher language comprehension scores than those who did not have consistent use.
This is Lauren. When we're considering this big topic of language deprivation and the big impact onto language, there is a pathway that we want professionals to keep in mind. I'm not going to step through each part today because we are a little bit short on time, but I do want to highlight the first one, parental decision making. How do parents make decisions about how to raise and support their deaf and hard of hearing child? Here's a reminder. More than 90% of children who are born DHH, deaf or hard of hearing, have parents who are both hearing. So for many families, their newborn that they're holding in their arms is the first deaf person that they have ever met. And we know that the earliest months are critical for brain building. Now let's flip that a little. New parents who have a child who has typical hearing do not need to pause to consider what language they will be using with their baby at home. This child will be immersed in the home languages that are happening in their home. For a child who is DHH, this is not an automatic case. So parental intent for how they will communicate with their little one and for how their child will communicate with others is something that needs space. It needs parent education, and it needs some time for families to be able to consider and make an informed choice. That intent leads to how do we make sure that language is accessible? How do we make sure that child's language is getting proficient? They are growing and hitting all their milestones. For our big goal, we want them to be ready for kindergarten. We want them to have those skills for school readiness. Next slide. I want everyone to just pause and read through the scenario that's here. And I'm curious if this might be a familiar scenario that you've experienced on your caseload. I see a couple heads smiling or smiles, and I see a couple heads nodding. Yes, this is a common scenario. Chris, will you click that one more time? This is an example of a little one who is not getting full access to a complete L1. She is likely missing out on hearing important speech sounds. Remember that Wheel of Fortune scenario at the very beginning. Incidentally, she's not being able to pick up on the conversations that are happening between mom and dad, but on the television, across the room, with siblings, with peers nearby. That incidental listening accounts for 80% of some of our vocabulary growth. That is huge. This little one is at risk for language deprivation. And we need to put a plan in place, right? Is it too late? Absolutely not. But it will require effort and work and support on behalf of the family and their Birth to Three program team.
Can you guys see this slide? If you go ahead and read that yourselves here. In this case, the child uses sign language, yet the parents use only 30 signs for certain names. It's not used in sentences, so that means that the child is not getting full access to the actual first ASL grammar structure, their first language. They are not getting that. So what is actually missing is grammar, words, words. That doesn't mean anything. They need to pick up the grammar to develop their language skills. Again, that's just like what was just said. Individual learning is 80%. Yes, the child needs to have all of that signing and exposure and language. They will pick up that learning. But in this situation, there is a possible delay in language vocab. It is possible. Is it too late? No, no, but it's important and to have required support and effort to really encourage them. And that does take effort.
We just have a few resources listed here, and I think this will be shared with you, so you'll have access to this. And we are ready for questions or comments.